because I kind of feel like just about anybody can do it with the right amount of attention and patience and management support. Also, I didn't know the answer to that question. What kind of person would be better at that? Well, as it turns out, I did know the answer to that question, but I wasn't aware of it. You see, years earlier, before I had written that book, and before I had even started our consulting firm called The Table Group, I worked as an executive in a software company, and I was the leader of a department. And we got Jim Collins' book, Built to Last, and we went and said, gosh, we have to have core values. And so we went and did some research and some conversations, and we identified these 3 words that we thought best described what we wanted to be and who we were. And so we just used that to hire people and to run our department and to make decisions. We didn't think much of it. It was just our core values. And then when we launched our firm, The Table Group, a few years later, we decided we should use those same values. That would be a good set of values for our new company. And then we would do some work with clients, and one of the things, among others, teamwork and leadership and strategy, one of the things we helped our clients with was identifying their core values. And almost inevitably, they would say, Pat, what are your company's values? And we'd say, well, we don't really publish them or broadcast them, but we'll let you know just in the context of working on this. These are our values, 1, 2, and 3. And often they would say, yeah, okay, we'll use those too. And we would say, no, those are our values. You have to come up with your own values based on your own history and your dynamics and your reality. And we thought that our clients, frankly, we thought they were being just a little bit lazy. Like, gosh, like, oh, well, we'll just take whatever values we can. We didn't realize what was going on until a few years later we realized, oh, there was actually a universal application of those 3 values. They weren't being lazy at all. Those 3 values, which we call virtues now, those 3 virtues were actually the descriptors of a person who could very easily overcome the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Those were the 3 things that if a person possesses those, they would be an ideal team player. But we didn't think anything of it. We were like, we don't know what we're going to do with that. We didn't plan on writing a book or anything. And then what we did tell our friends and other consultants we knew and our clients, hey, these 3 values might be helpful to you. Well, a few years later, I was having lunch with a good friend of mine named Matthew Kelly, who's also an author, and Matthew said, what are you writing right now? And I said, nothing. I don't think I'm going to do any more writing at all because I think I've written everything I have. I don't have anything to say. And he said, well, what about those 3 values? And I was like, oh, yeah. You think that's a book? And he goes, yeah, I think it's a book. So I wrote this book, and I will tell you, and I mean this completely sincerely, there's no false modesty here, I am totally shocked that after 4 months, it's selling more than any book I've ever written. And we were like, what is going on? Because the truth of the matter is, and I'll tell you, I think it's really straightforward and simple. I don't think it's my best book, but there's something in it that seems to have struck a nerve among a lot of managers. And so I'm going to take you through that right now. I just want you to know, I really don't think it's that good, but I'll let you be the judge of that. I do tell my staff that. I don't think this one's that good. No, it's good. Shut up. It's selling. So let's take a look at this model. Now, again, I'm going to tell you, though, when I go through these 3 words, you're going to be unimpressed, as you should be, because it's not rocket science. It's very straightforward. It seems to me like it's not the values themselves, which we're very familiar with. It's the overlap and the combination of the 3 that really is what makes it special, or makes it helpful, I should say. So let's go ahead and find the model. Okay, so the ideal team player is comprised of a person that has 3 virtues, the first of which is humility. An ideal team player is humble. That's not a big surprise, but to be a great team player, you have to be humble. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that means you're more interested in others than in yourself. You're not about ego. You're about the greater good rather than in your own needs. You're not arrogant. That's the most classic definition of humility. We know a person that doesn't look humble, arrogant, self-centered, ego-driven. Okay, and that is really the most important definition we have to understand. But I want to caution you, because sometimes we meet a person that doesn't seem to be ego-driven and arrogant, and we think, well, they're humble. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes they simply lack self-confidence, which is actually a violation of humility. You see, I think the best definition I ever heard of humility was that it's just the recognition of that which is true. And what is true is God is God, I'm not God, and so that's who I am. And if he gave me a skill, he gave me a skill. If he didn't, he didn't. And if we can just come to terms with that. Now, a person who denies their own skills, who downplays their abilities, tends to not weigh in at meetings, not to to passionately argue for something that's right, they say, okay, I don't need to be heard. That's not humility. That's not humility. As Ken Blanchard likes to say, quoting C.S. Lewis, humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. And that's what we're looking for there. So it's not a lack of confidence. So humility is the first necessary and the most important criteria of a team player. And you know, pride is the root of all sin, right? Humility is the antidote to pride, so that makes sense that that's the most important. Now, the second value or virtue of an ideal team player is hunger. You have to be hungry. A hungry person is pretty straightforward. It's somebody who has a strong work ethic. They always want to do more. They want to go above and beyond. They hate the idea of anyone ever considering them to be a slacker. They are generally passionate about what they're doing, and they will do whatever is necessary to get it done. Okay? Hunger is pretty straightforward. Ironically, it might be the hardest one to instill in someone later in life, but it's the easiest one to understand. Okay? Okay. The final virtue of an ideal team player is smart. Now, but this is not intellectual smarts. This is, as Travis talked about in much more detail than I could or will, about really emotional intelligence. It's really about people smarts, common sense around people. And Travis and I were talking about this before my talk a few days ago, and we agreed that what this is really people that are good at practicing those behaviors, those 4 behaviors of an emotionally intelligent person. It's a person who goes to meetings and knows that when they say or do something, they know how it's going to impact the people around them. Or if someone's in a bad mood or is feeling upset about something, they notice it and they adjust to that. So smart, in this case, is about people smarts, common sense around people. Why do I call it smart? One, because I did for years. We thought that's really what smart is. It's not intelligent. Because I think a person who's intelligent but doesn't treat people well is not smart at all. So we like the fact that people would ask, what do you mean by smart? Because we really wanted them to help them understand that in spite of what most people do, hiring people for intelligence is not a great idea. Okay. So what do you do with this model? Well, what you need to do first is you need to know how to identify people that work on your teams, yourself as well, and prospective employees who you might one day hire. You need to be able to identify people who have those things, and to do that you have to be able to identify people who lack those things. So we put together a model I want to go through with you right now, which is looking at the various permutations and combinations of humble, hungry, and smart for people who lack one or more. Okay? So people who lack hunger and smart, so people who are just humble, who might be a very sweet person, but they're not hungry to work hard, they don't really understand how to deal with other people, we call them the pawn. The pawn is a person who generally is not very effective on a team. They don't really get things going, make things happen. They don't know how to work through others. They might be a good neighbor. They might be a good person to work in certain jobs in the world. But if you depend on them at all to be on a team, that's not a good thing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one because, frankly, these people probably aren't showing up for a ton of interviews. They're not rising up the ranks in organizations. And we just need to understand them. They need our prayers, but they probably don't need to be invited to be on our teams. It's true of everyone, right? I mean, okay, what about people who are just hungry? Just hungry. They're not humble and they're not smart. This is what we call the bulldozer. The bulldozer is somebody with lots of ambition and lots of drive, does not know how to deal with people, and frankly, it's all about them, not about those other people. This is a person who can get some certain things done and they leave a trail of dead bodies behind them. We all know these people. We've seen these people. Sometimes they succeed in organizations, usually if they're in charge and nobody checks them, or if the leader's kind of a wimp and isn't willing to call them on it. So sometimes bulldozers can actually survive longer in organizations than we know. But they're pretty easy to identify, and I would definitely suggest not hiring them, and I definitely suggest a very short leash on these people until they improve. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Okay. What about the person who's just smart? They're really good with people. They're not humble, they're not hungry, but they know how to say things that are going to elicit the right response. We call them the charmer. I don't know why we moved off of the schmoozer, because that was our initial answer, but this is the charmer. They're the tap dancer, they're funny, they're the comedian, they're joking, but they never get things done. they're not hardworking, and really they're not that interested in other people's success. Okay, these are the three easy ones. The pawn, the bulldozer, the charmer. Fairly easy to avoid hiring them, fairly easy to weed them out of an organization. The tough ones are the ones that have two of the values, but not all three. Now this is tempting because we tend to think, well, they have two of them, but let me tell you, 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 + 1 is 9 in this. 2 is not enough. We cannot be tolerating people who are egregiously lacking in one of these areas. Now that doesn't mean we don't try to develop them, but if a person only has 2, it creates really serious problems in organizations. Now before I move on, let me just issue a warning. I don't want you to use these labels capriciously, like, and just throw them out there. Hey, I think you might be a charmer. I mean, that could be really damaging, right? Because nobody's perfect, and we all struggle. Sometimes for a day, sometimes for a while, sometimes in parts of our lives. What we're talking about here is people who demonstrate over time, a consistent lack of one of these things. And so we use these labels to help you identify them, but we don't want you to throw them around in a way that is damaging. Okay? So let's take a look at the people who are humble and hungry. Now, I love people who are humble and hungry. Those are my two favorite ones in terms of they have good intentions. They care about other people. They want to get things done, but they're not smart emotionally. You know, these are the people who, well, we call them, by the way, the accidental mess maker. The accidental mess maker. You know, my wife talked to me after 15 years into getting a puppy. We have a puppy at home right now. And he is so cute, which is really good because I'm sure I'd have thrown him into the ditch by now if he weren't, because it is so much pain. But he is so loving and so wonderful, but he's constantly making messes. And you know those employees that you work with? They mean well, but you're constantly having to make excuses. Oh, he's actually a good guy. She's not so bad, really, if you get to know her. And you got to look at their emails before they send them, and you got to say, oh, why'd you do that? They ruffle people's feathers, and they don't need to. I like to think in the world of books and movies and fiction to try to identify examples. And so I use it. How many people here have seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Raise your hand. Okay, who's not seen it? Anybody? Somebody? Nobody? Anybody? Not seen it? Wow, look at that. Nobody's seen it. Okay, good. George Bailey is the main character in It's a Wonderful Life, played by Jimmy Stewart. Right now, if you don't think too hard about it, you think, oh, he was a great guy at the end. You know, they all save him and everything. But he was actually an accidental mess maker. Really humble, cared about the world, wanted to help everybody, really hungry, worked really hard, but he often said things that he didn't need to. You know, like, Mr. Potter, you're a mean, terrible man, you know, and he was like, don't say that. You remember that? Or he called his daughter's school teacher at one point and said, your wife, to her husband, your wife was a terrible teacher, why is she doing that? And the guy punched him in the nose. It's like, so probably Travis would have a good chemical explanation of George Bailey. The truth of the matter is, though, he just wasn't that smart in how he dealt with people sometimes. Now, I tell you this because I have a lot of time for those people. Because at least I know their intentions are good. At least I know their intentions are good. But you still have to work with them. The next type is the one that is humble and has good emotional intelligence, and they're people smart. They're just not hungry. And we call them the lovable slacker. The lovable slacker. Now, these people tend to survive in organizations for a long time because they're lovable. Because they mean well, they care about their teammates, they're encouraging their teammates, they're smart about how they just don't really want to do that much work. And unfortunately, they'll usually do just enough work to make it hard for you to do something about it. And no more. And you set a goal, and they'll just barely get there, and then that's it. And they don't ask their teammates if they need help. They don't go above and beyond. And it's just that frustrating. I once worked with a guy at a client company, and this guy, he had so much passion for his car collection and for his softball team and for everything in his life but his work. And they would talk to him over and over again, and he always said, yeah, I know, and I'm going to do better and all this stuff. And it took 6 years to move this guy on to where he could find an environment where either being a lovable slacker was okay or he could find passion. This kind of person I have a lot of time for. I think if people have humility, I have a lot of time for them. But nonetheless, it's really damaging on a team, because you know who gets frustrated the most by these people? The people who work really hard, because they realize, I think I'm doing most of this guy's work. So we have to be aware of that. Okay, the next one. People who are, by the way, the next one is by far the most dangerous and the hardest one to spot, and it is dangerous. It's the person who is smart interpersonally and really hungry, really driven, but not humble. This is what we call the skillful politician. And we use that word for a reason. The skillful politician, the danger of a skillful politician is that they're ambitious and hard driving and that they know how to make themselves look humble. They're really good at it, and they convince people that they care about the team, and they convince people that